This is a virtual book launch. It's called Sarah and the Chocolate Cake. It's written by me, Andrew Gillies. Let me just read to you what I've written on the back cover. Sarah, the little girl who was mostly happy, even though she was very badly drawn, decides to make a cake. But everything goes wrong. It's a disaster. Everything seems lost. Watch how this disaster gets turned into something wonderful. And then I've got a quote from myself, which is a bit cheeky. In my view, the best stick figure children's book with theological themes ever written. And then this is what I say about myself. Reverend Andrew Gillies, is a minister who's been delighting children and adults with his Sarah stories for nearly 30 years. Tired of hearing, "You should publish them," he thought he'd try his luck and prove them right or prove them wrong if no one wants to buy it. So, Sarah and the Chocolate Cake by Andrew Gillies. There's the title page. And inside the title page I write, this story began around 2005 as a children's talk for a presentation in church on Good Friday. The character, Sarah, and her mum began life in 1996 as a children's story on overhead projector slides, and her cousin George and her dad were added in later years. If you're not a churchy person, feel free to stop reading at page 16. And I've dedicated this to anyone who's ever made a mistake, which I think is probably most of you, and to Heather, Eli, Parker and Ivy, who get most things right. They're my kids and my wife. This is a story about Sarah, the little girl who was mostly happy, even though she was very badly drawn. One day, Sarah wanted to make a chocolate cake for the family to share. First, she got out the great big bowl, and then she got out the great big box of cocoa. And she tried to put a little bit into the bowl, but it all fell in. It was a terrible disaster. Sarah's mum heard her crying. "What's wrong, Sarah?" "I'm sorry, Mum. I've made a mess. I was trying to make a cake, but all I've made is a terrible disaster that I can't fix." Sarah's mum was sad because it was a disaster, because all the cocoa was used, and mostly because Sarah was so sad and upset. Sarah's mum had a great idea. She told Sarah's dad, and together they made a plan. See, there's the plan they made. First, they had to hire 3 trucks and a digger. Look at that. The big truck had lots of things on it. Turn the page, we can see some of those things. Oh, no, we won't turn the page. See there's flour and eggs, milk, so a few different things. The digger dug a big hole. The coal was dropped into the hole and it was set on fire. The cocoa, the flour, the milk, the eggs and the sugar were all put into the cement mixer and mixed up together. you can probably guess what's going to happen. The tank was put into the big hole. The cake mix was poured in, and the tank was covered with hot coals, and it was left to cook. You see Sarah looking on. When the cake was ready, it was lifted out with the crane, and Sarah's dad cut it out of the tank with an angle grinder. You can see there he's wearing safety equipment. When he was finished, Sarah was amazed to see the biggest, yummiest cake she had ever seen. She's amazed. Look at that cake, it's huge. By using their plan, Sarah's mum and dad had changed her terrible disaster into something wonderful. And that's the end, or almost. Now, this story was inspired by the story of Good Friday and the death of Jesus. So if you're not a churchy person, you might want to finish there, but it tells the basic Christian story. There was once another terrible disaster that no one could fix. Jesus died on the cross. But God turned it into something wonderful. God used the cross to forgive us and turn our terrible disasters into something great. God is like Sarah's mum and dad. They loved her and fixed up her bad mistake, even though it must have cost lots and lots. Imagine hiring all that equipment and buying the tank and all that flour and all those eggs. God loves us and used a plan to fix up our mistakes too, even though it meant that Jesus died. God turns our terrible disasters into something wonderful. And that's the end. So that's Sarah and the chocolate cake. I've written a number of Sarah stories, and if enough people want to buy this one or download it or use it in some way, and if you buy a copy, either the print copy or the Kindle copy, you're quite welcome to use it for education or ministry purposes without having to seek extra copyright permission. All other rights are reserved, you know, that kind of thing that everyone says. But that's a story, and it tries to explain the story of Good Friday, but also the story of how disasters and bad things happening can be turned into wonderful things, no matter what your faith background. So Sarah and the chocolate cake, about a terrible disaster being turned into something wonderful. From Amazon, and both in Kindle and in paperback form.